The room went silent the moment the teacher asked who had taught the boy sign language. The question was simple, almost casual, but it landed like thunder in a clear sky. Every parent in the classroom turned toward the single dad standing near the back, his hands clenched tightly in front of him, his heart pounding so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. He had come prepared for awkward glances, for polite smiles, even for pity. He had not come prepared for this. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness and second chances and in the quiet strength of ordinary people doing extraordinary things, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel. A hibe to the channel. Stories like this deserve to be heard. David had almost not shown up that morning. The parent-teacher meeting invitation had been sitting on the kitchen counter for days, tucked between unpaid bills and a half-finished grocery list. He had read it over and over again, imagining the whispers, the sideways glances, the unspoken judgments. Single dad, no mother present, a boy who did not speak. His son, Ethan, was 8 years old and had been born profoundly deaf. From the first day in the hospital, when the nurses realized he did not respond to sound, David's life had split into two versions, the one he had imagined and the one he would have to learn to live. His wife, Clara, had tried it first. They both had. First. But the sleepless nights, the medical appointments, the therapy sessions, the endless worry slowly eroded their marriage. When Ethan was 3, Clara left. She said she could not handle the silence. She said she felt like she was drowning in a world she did not understand. David had stood in the doorway that day, holding his son, watching the woman he loved walk away. The silence had never felt louder. He worked 2 jobs to keep their small apartment. During the day, he was a warehouse supervisor. At night, he stocked shelves at a grocery store. In between shifts, he learned sign language. He watched online tutorials until his eyes burned. He attended free community classes. He practiced in the mirror, fumbling, repeating, refusing to give up. His hands became his voice. His face became his tone. He learned that communication was not just sound. It was expression, movement, presence. Ethan had struggled in school at first. Some teachers tried, but many did not know how to reach him. Children can be cruel without meaning to be, and Ethan often sat alone at recess, watching other kids laugh in a world he could not hear. David saw the loneliness in his son's eyes and felt it cut deeper than any insult directed at himself. The meeting that day was supposed to be routine. David had dressed in his cleanest shirt, ironed carefully the night before. He had rehearsed polite responses in his mind. He had prepared himself to ask how Ethan was doing academically, whether he was keeping up, whether he was fitting in. The classroom was bright, filled with neat rows of desks and a large chalkboard at the front. Parents sat in chairs meant for children, knees awkwardly bent, whispering to one another. David chose a seat near the back, hoping to blend in. But he felt different, separate, as if a spotlight followed him wherever he moved. When the teacher began speaking, David watched her lips closely. He had learned to read them well enough, though not perfectly. She spoke about the importance of communication skills, about class participation, about a recent presentation assignment where students were encouraged to share something meaningful about their lives. Then she mentioned Ethan. She explained that Ethan had stood in front of the class and delivered his presentation entirely in sign language. At first, the students were confused. But then something unexpected happened. Several children began signing back. They had been learning basic signs from Ethan during recess, curious and eager. The teacher said that Ethan had become an unofficial instructor, teaching his classmates how to say hello, how are you, friend, and thank you. There was admiration in her voice, genuine admiration. Then she asked who had taught Ethan sign language so fluently, who had given him such confidence. The room fell quiet. David felt every eye on him. For a split second, old insecurities threatened to choke him. He remembered the doctors who had spoken over him instead of to him, over him instead of to him. The relatives who had whispered that raising a deaf child alone would be too much. The nights he had fallen asleep at the kitchen table with flashcards spread around him. He raised his hand slowly, almost apologetically. He did not speak loudly. He simply explained that he had learned alongside his son, that they practiced every night, that they told each other stories with their hands, that they laughed in silence. After the meeting, a few parents approached David. They asked about sign language classes. They asked how their children could learn more. One mother admitted she had initially felt sorry for Ethan, but now she saw him as brave and inspiring. David nodded politely, but inside, something was shifting. A weight he had carried for years began to lighten. On the walk home, Ethan skipped beside him, backpack bouncing against his small shoulders. David signed to him about the meeting, about how proud the teacher was. Ethan's face lit up, his hands moving quickly as he asked questions, as he expressed excitement. They stopped at a crosswalk, and David realized that for the first time in a long time, he was not thinking about what they lacked. He was thinking about what they had built. Life did not suddenly become easy. Bills still arrived. Exhaustion still clung to David's bones. There were still moments when he lay awake at night, wondering if he was doing enough. But something fundamental had changed. He no longer saw himself as a man barely holding things together. He began to see himself as a father who had done what needed to be done. Weeks later, the school organized a small assembly celebrating diversity and inclusion. Ethan was invited to demonstrate basic sign language to the entire grade. David took time off work to attend. He stood at the back of the auditorium watching his son on stage under bright lights. Ethan's hands moved confidently, his face animated, his posture proud. Hundreds of small hands in the audience attempted to mimic him. The room buzzed not with sound, but with movement. It was messy and imperfect and beautiful. David felt tears slide down his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. In that moment, he understood something powerful. Silence was not emptiness. It was space. Space for effort, for love, for growth. He had once feared that raising a deaf child alone would define him as incomplete. Instead, it had defined him as resilient. If this story is touching your heart so far, please take a second to engage with this video. Like it, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps stories like this reach more people who might be struggling quietly. As months passed, the school introduced an after-school sign language club led by a volunteer instructor. The inspiration for it, everyone knew, had started with a small boy and his father. David sometimes stayed after meetings, helping parents practice simple signs. He was no expert, but he shared what he knew. He spoke not as a professional, but as a parent who had refused to give up. One evening, as they walked home from the club, Ethan tugged at his sleeve and signed something that made David stop in his tracks. Ethan expressed gratitude for his father learning his language, for never making him feel broken, for always looking at him when he spoke with his hands. David swallowed hard. He remembered the early days when he had felt overwhelmed, when frustration had bubbled up because he could not understand what his toddler was trying to say. He remembered feeling like he was failing, but he had kept trying. Now he realized that effort had meant everything. The world would not always be accommodating. There would be challenges ahead, misunderstandings, barriers. But Ethan would face them knowing he was not alone. He would face them knowing his voice mattered, even if it was silent. David no longer dreaded parent meetings. He no longer shrank under curious stares. He walked into rooms with his shoulders straighter, not because life was perfect, but because he had proven something to himself. Love, when paired with action, is louder than any sound. Before we reach the end, I have a special request for you. Please comment the word courage below if you believe that love is shown through effort, not perfection. In the quiet of their small apartment that night, David and Ethan sat at the kitchen table, signing back and forth about their day. The world outside hummed with traffic and distant noise, but inside there was a different kind of music. Hands moving, eyes meeting, hearts understanding. The teacher's question had once made a room go silent, but in that silence, a truth had been revealed. A single dad, tired and imperfect, had chosen to learn his son's language instead of expecting his son to adapt to the world alone. And that choice had changed more than one classroom. It had changed how a father saw himself. It had changed how a child saw his place in the world. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of showing up even when it is hard, please like this video, share it, and subscribe. Your engagement keeps these stories alive and spreads hope to those who might feel unseen. Because sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones spoken without a single sound. The silence that once felt like a burden slowly became the foundation of something bigger than David had ever imagined. A few months after the assembly, the school counselor called him in for a separate meeting. For a split second, the old anxiety returned. He had grown used to good news recently, but years of bracing for disappointment do not disappear overnight. He sat across from the counselor in a small office filled with motivational posters and children's drawings, his hands resting tensely on his knees. She explained that something unusual had been happening in the classroom. Conflicts among students had decreased. Group participation had improved. Even children who struggled with anxiety were raising their hands more often. When she looked into the cause, a surprising connection kept appearing. The students who regularly practiced sign language with Ethan showed greater empathy and patience with others. David listened, barely breathing. The counselor said that learning to communicate without sound forced the children to slow down, to look at one another, to pay attention to facial expressions and emotions. It made them more aware, more present. Ethan had not just taught them signs, he had taught them to see. That word stayed with David all the way home. See, for years he had worried about whether the world would see his son beyond his disability. He had not realized that Ethan was teaching the world how to see better. But just when things seemed steady, life reminded David that growth is never a straight line. At work, the warehouse announced layoffs, budget cuts, reduced hours. David's name was on the list of supervisors being let go. He would keep his night job at the grocery store, but it would not be enough to cover rent and utilities long term. The old fear returned, heavy and suffocating. He did not tell Ethan right away. He did not want to burden him. But children sense change in ways adults underestimate. Ethan noticed the extra tension in his father's shoulders, the deeper lines in his forehead, the way he stared at the wall after dinner. One night, as they sat at the kitchen table, Ethan gently reached across and tapped his father's hand. He signed a simple question. "Are you okay?" David hesitated, then nodded. But Ethan held his gaze and signed again, slower this time. "Tell me." And so David did. He explained the job situation in simple terms, careful not to dramatize it. He admitted he was worried but promised they would be okay. As he signed, he expected to see fear in his son's eyes. Instead, he saw determination. The next week, the school hosted a community open house showcasing student projects. Ethan had been working on something quietly in the background. David thought it was just another classroom assignment. He had no idea how big it would become. When they arrived at the school gym, colorful posters lined the walls. Students stood beside display boards explaining science experiments and art pieces. In the center of the room, a small stage had been set up with a banner reading of voices without sound. David felt his pulse quicken. Ethan walked confidently to the front and began signing a story, but this time something was different. As he moved his hands, a group of classmates stood beside him, voicing his words aloud for the audience. They had practiced translating his signs into speech in real time. The story he told was about a boy who felt invisible until someone learned his language. It was about a father who stayed. It was about not giving up when things felt impossible. David's throat tightened as he realized this was not just a story. It was their story. When Ethan finished, the applause was overwhelming. Parents stood. Teachers wiped tears from their eyes. And then the principal stepped onto the stage with an announcement that would change everything. Inspired by Ethan's leadership, the school had partnered with a local community center to launch a free weekend sign language program for families. They needed volunteers. They needed mentors. They needed someone who understood what it meant to start from zero and keep going. Several teachers turned toward David. He felt exposed, unprepared, unqualified. But then he looked at Ethan, standing tall under the lights, smiling with quiet pride. In that moment, David understood something he had been too afraid to consider before. Maybe he was not just surviving. Maybe he had something valuable to offer. He agreed to help. Balancing the night job and volunteering was exhausting. There were evenings when David questioned whether he had made a mistake. But every Saturday morning, as he watched parents struggle through their first clumsy signs, he saw reflections of his former self, the frustration, the doubt, the love. He told them what he wished someone had told him years ago, that fluency is not built in a day, that mistakes are part of the journey, that showing up consistently matters more than being perfect. Word spread beyond the school, more families enrolled. Some had deaf children, others simply wanted to learn. The program grew slowly but steadily. Then something unexpected happened. A representative from a local nonprofit organization attended one of the sessions. She had heard about the program's impact and wanted to explore a partnership. After several meetings, they offered David a part-time position coordinating community outreach for accessibility programs. It was not a high-paying job, but it came with stability, benefits, and, most importantly, purpose. For the first time in years, David felt like his experience, his struggle, had transformed into something meaningful beyond his own home. The day he signed the contract, he came home with a rare lightness in his step. He knelt in front of Ethan and shared the news in animated signs. Ethan's eyes widened, then filled with tears. He threw his arms around his father, holding him tightly. In that embrace, David realized something profound. Every sleepless night, every moment of self-doubt, every sacrifice had built toward this. But the real victory was not the job. It was the confidence blooming inside his son. At school, Ethan no longer sat alone at recess. He was surrounded by friends eager to practice new signs. He was invited to birthday parties. He was chosen as group leader for projects. Teachers consulted him when discussing inclusion strategies. He was not the deaf boy. He was Ethan. One afternoon, months later, the same teacher who had once asked who taught him sign language invited David to speak at a district-wide conference about parental involvement. Standing at the podium, looking out at a room filled with educators, David felt a familiar tremor of nerves. He was not a polished speaker. He was not a professional lecturer. He was just a father. He told them about the fear he had felt in hospital rooms, about the day his wife left, about sitting on the floor with flashcards after long shifts. He told them that inclusion begins at home, with a parent willing to step into their child's world instead of forcing the child to step into theirs. When he finished, the applause was not just polite. It was grateful. Driving home that evening, he reflected on how far they had come. There had been a time when he avoided eye contact at meetings, when he felt judged and inadequate. Now he walked into rooms knowing that his journey, imperfect and messy, carried weight. And through it all, Ethan had been the quiet catalyst. Before we close this story, if it has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, share, and comment. Your engagement helps spread stories of resilience and reminds others that they are not alone in their struggles. As the years past, challenges continued, as they always do. There were new hurdles in middle school, new complexities in adolescence, but the foundation remained strong. Communication, trust, effort. On Ethan's 12th birthday, he stood in the living room of their slightly larger apartment, a place they could now afford, and signed something that David would carry with him forever. He told his father that he had never felt silent, because someone had always been listening. David stepped forward and pulled his son into a tight embrace. Outside, the city buzzed with noise. Inside, their home was filled with understanding. The teacher's question at that first meeting had once created an awkward silence, but it had also revealed a truth that would echo far beyond that classroom. Sometimes the strongest voices are shaped in struggle. Sometimes the greatest leaders are children who simply refuse to be invisible. And sometimes the most heroic acts are not grand gestures, but daily decisions to learn to adapt and to stay. David had once feared he was not enough, but love, expressed through tired hands practicing signs at midnight, had been more than enough. And in the quiet language they shared, father and son had built a world where neither of them would ever feel unheard again.